just here to attend and hopefully to get engaged in the discussion we'll be having in the second half of the event. Just I know how busy a time of year it is for a lot of us. So it's great to have so many of you here. So I suppose, first of all, my own name is Claire Garrity, and together with Kira Broderick and Carlos Garrido Castellano, we have organised this series of conversations about Latin America and Ireland. So I suppose the events have kind of evolved a lot since they were first conceived. We had hoped to do something in person quite some time ago now, and some of you would have been aware of that at the time. And of course, we've had to adapt and to change, like everybody else. But just by way of brief introduction, first of all, I'll just mention just about the structure of the event, of what we're doing here today. So we have 7, am I right in saying? Yes, we have 7 speakers here today. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order by surname, just as I have you here with your bios. So I'm going to introduce each speaker as they are about to speak. They will give a brief 3-minute presentation just on who they are, what their work is, and then we have also given them a sort of a guiding question, which I'm now going to paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me. But we're asking people to think about how what we know, or what our engagement with Latin America, how that can help us to interact with Irish problems in our context here at home, or vice versa, whichever is more relevant to that person and their work. So after each speaker gives their brief presentation, we're going to have a short break, just a 10-minute comfort break to kind of get those ideas maybe percolating for the discussion that we'll have then when we come back. So we'll see how we're going for time and kind of how that works out. So I just wanted to share kind of a brief impression that I was left with after the last event that we had roughly a month ago. So first of all, many of you were there and can hopefully agree with me that it was very rich, very engaging discussion that we had. And I suppose I was left really struck by the amount of connections that there are, I suppose, between Latin America and Ireland. And how, I suppose, the richness of this network that we have, and I really hope that the links we make today will continue on. But I was also left just thinking a little bit about this kind of question of marginality, because I think one of the things that prompted Kira, Carlos, and myself to maybe start thinking about this event was the tendency that exists to maybe have a kind of a unilateral approach to Latin America, in terms of maybe, I suppose, a lot of the time our engagement can be lacking that two-way interaction. And so we really wanted to combat that with this event. And just I was left thinking about a quote that I really enjoy from Bell Hooks, when she, in her work From Margin to Centre, she speaks about marginality as this kind of a different, I'm pretty sure she says, a different place from which to see. And for me, I suppose that really summed up kind of not only the potential that's there when we engage with a location, and whether it's geographical or otherwise, and that's in some way marginal or othered. So thanks for listening to me on that. So what I'm going to do now is introduce our first speaker. So I just have Johnny Batista here. Johnny, are you okay to start?
Sure, yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I'll just introduce you, Johnny, if that's okay. I'll just introduce you. So Johnny Batista is a Brazilian jazz musician living in Dublin for 7 years. He has a bachelor's in DCU's jazz performance program, which he completed last year. And he has since been a part of the music scene. He's been a part of the music scene in Dublin since arriving in Ireland. Johnny Batista is also a part of a leftist collective called BLF, Brazilian Left Group, an organisation of Brazilians living in Ireland with progressive social and economic views. He works specifically with the media, artistic groups, in relation to this group BLF, and you can find Johnny on Instagram at Johnny_Batista, and the spelling of that would be in the email, but I can also just comment it here in the chat if anyone wants to take a look. So Johnny, I'm right in saying you don't have slides, is that right?
I actually made a couple of slides, but I didn't email them to you. Can I use?
Feel free.
Yeah. Is it the present now?
That's
button
right.
there? Oh, there you go. Okay. Perfect. Let me just share my screen if I can. Just 1 second, guys. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. So, yeah, I know loads of you are gonna talk about your views on Latin America. I'm from Brazil, and Brazilian people usually tend to have a pretty narrow view. We think about ourselves a lot more than we think about Latin America in general. I know Brazilian people are like this, but I'll just want to talk to you really quickly about what I think would be interesting. Are you guys looking at this? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, the situation in Brazil right now, I think we're all aware of the rise of the far right in Brazil. I know this is a problem around the world as well, and I think the problems that we see in Brazil, it's what the far right brings to the conversation with the table. It's nationalism, racism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia as well. Like all of this that are in the society already, and we kind of can't see that coming out of people's mouths right now, and it has normalized um, a discourse of hate, and in Brazil, it's pretty the results of these politics are really clear. When we talk about COVID, the situation in Brazil right now with the COVID, it's pretty it's horrible actually. And what Bolsonaro seems to that politic, it's fueled by hate, and we can see that has like results that are really bad for the nation and for the continent as well. And a couple of months ago, we start to see recent episodes of xenophobic attacks. I know loads of people who works for delivery services and in Dublin, and we're hearing that from years and years, but that's becoming more apparent in the media in general right now because of some unfortunate episodes that happened a few weeks ago, and that led us to think in BLF, in the Brazilian Left Front, we're thinking about this with the riders, and we see like a lot of seeds of the same problems that we face in Latin America. We can see they growing here as well, which is it's concerning. And we're thinking about what we kind of the elements that we can see present in the two cultures. It's the colonialism, right? And I know there is like lots of particularities in the way Ireland was colonized, and Brazil, and the way the Britons did, the way the Portuguese and Spanish did. But I think we have to kind of start thinking in an anti-colonial way. Um, in There's a few topics that I put there just for there's there's a Brazilian intellectual called Jenny Nunes. She's an indigenous activist, and she had this monoculture, the concept that she brought from agriculture to think about how we see society in a monotheistic way, and all the colonial impositions of concepts that we see ourselves through the eyes of the colonizer, right? This is I think we're right now thinking about that as like um, as a response to the problems we kind of see happening here and we see happening back home. So that's my 2 cents about that. Thanks so much, guys, for that. I really appreciate it. I think the this is really interesting. I know I'm amongst like very smart people. I'm just a jazz musician, so yeah. Thank you so much.
Johnny, thank you so much for that. It's amazing to have your input, and particularly, you know, with your activism with the BLF, the practical experience that you have there, is so valuable. So thank you so much. Certainly, that shared history, of colonialism, I'm sure that's something that we'll be able to get into, that may come up again, or that we can certainly come back to in our discussion later on. So Margaret, you're next on my list, if that's okay. I'm just going to introduce Dr. Margaret Brenny here. Margaret is an IRC Caroline Fellow in the SPLAS department, the Department of Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American Studies in UCC. In collaboration with the Palacio del Segundo Cabo, a Centre for European Cuban Connections in Havana, her research focuses on Irish migration, gender, and race in the context of slavery in Cuba. Margaret is on Twitter and Facebook, and also mentions the Society for Irish Latin American Studies. There's a Facebook group there as well. So Margaret, I'll post your social media links if that's okay, and I'll let you go ahead there. Thank you.
On mute. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, just I'll talk about the research. It looks more broadly at the interrelated processes of Irish migration, Atlantic slavery, and ethnic whitening in the Spanish colony of Cuba, and focusing on processes of gender, race, and culture in a time of plantation slavery. So the approach I'm using is multidisciplinary across history, social sciences, and digital humanities. And with the help of colleagues in Cuba, we're producing an open access digital archive on Irish settlement in Cuba. The site will hold the archives that we're finding, and it'll also hold curated exhibitions of what is an entangled history of Irish, African, and European encounters under Spanish colonialism. So I'll just talk a bit about the archives. The time spent there was full of unexpected findings that forced me to broaden the scope in some ways. Because the archives can only be searched manually, it's pre-digital. The most productive method was to use Irish surnames as keywords. And this led me to the well-known Irish names in Cuba, mostly associated with plantation slavery, such as O'Farrell's, O'Reilly's, Madden, Kindelan, Cray, Nagel, Wright. There's plenty of them. And these were significant traders and owners of enslaved people of African origin. Some of them have been researched by Cuban historians, but they're generally not connected to Ireland and often described as English because they were British subjects when they arrived in Cuba. What surprised me most, and really has led me to shift my attention, is the number of documents with Irish names associated with people of African descent, both enslaved and free. These records then, as I'm finding, allow us to reflect on Irish participation in slavery from the perspective of the African diaspora in Cuba. So not only is the project filling in the silences in migration history, also trying to correct some of the distortions in Irish migration history and its relationship to Atlantic slavery. The documentation as well provides the opportunity to study Black history in relationship to Ireland. So these archives really demand that we pay attention to the history of slavery by expanding the traditional scope of Irish genealogies to include people who have Irish surnames as a mark of property that links them to Irish slave owners and their descendants. So we can see from these archives also that the descendants of Irish slave owners played a significant part in the political economy of slavery, but also in the discursive and ideological work of race making. So the investigation that I'm involved in tries to pay attention to the narrative discourse of racialized slavery, violence, and gender associated with Irish family names found in the Cuban archives. So Irish migration is explored here in the context of historical links between settler colonialism, migration, and slavery. And the hope is to open a space of inquiry that, in the words of Lisa Lowe, is one of, and I quote, productive attention to the scene of loss, a thinking with twofold attention that seeks to encompass at once the positive objects and methods of history and social science, and the matters absent, entangled, and unavailable by its methods, end quote. By reading across these connections between interrelated processes of trans-imperial, settler colonialism and slavery in the past, and also looking individually and collectively at how Irish immigrants contributed to the social and economic processes of plantation slavery, we find an account that begins to unsettle official narratives of Irish migration that have persisted through generations through to the present. Irish migration is largely told through the frame of national historiography, portraying a homogenous and Eurocentric experience. And we can find this and see this, hear this in echoes from diasporic histories, or as Steve Garner calls it, past interpretations leaking through into today's discourse of racialization. And I hope that maybe we can pick up on some of these themes in the conversation afterwards. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I'd heard you speak briefly before, I think, on your work, maybe at one of the research clinics, but I got some new details there, and it was great. Thank you so much. I'm sure that we'll have to chat more about that as well later on, and particularly that unsettling of the sort of the national narratives and those master kind of rhetorics that are generally accepted as truth and not perhaps troubled as often as they should be. So thank you for that, Margaret. So next up, so we have Christian. I'll just introduce Christian here. So Christian has sent his bio. So Christian describes himself as a Nicaraguan refugee with international protection, founder of Montebello Products, and writer of Alice Quinn, The Riddle of the Witch. So I'm going to go ahead and present now. I'm just really hoping. My one option is your entire screen, so I guess let's go. Let's do that. Here we are. Okay, allow. Okay. So if I full screen that, then is that coming up for everybody? It should say El Soñador. It's an image.
Yeah, we can see it, Claire. Thanks.
Yeah, I can see it. Thank you.
Lovely. So Christian, whenever you're ready there.
Okay, hi everyone. Well, that was my first book. When I wrote that book, it was in my country, in Nicaragua, in 2018. That book have a lot of Celtic mythology. At that point in my life, I didn't know much about Ireland, but I'm a curious person, and every time when I need to know something about anything, I always try to make a deep search. And after this book, well, I couldn't do nothing with this book because I had to leave my country. And I think part of that learning about the Celtic mythology and everything make me feel, give me a strong connection with Ireland. So after my process as an asylum seeker, I remember when I was in the hotel and the place that I used to live, I will start to thinking about what I want to do now. And then I realized like my connection with Ireland, it was a bridge to bring my culture to this country and the culture to Ireland, to Latin America. That's why I'm start with a new book, which is Alice Quinn and the Riddle of the Witch. If you can put the other, Claire, please, the other image, that one, yeah. This book is everything about Ireland. It's a fantasy story, but it's the way to get involved the new generation to discover more about the country. Because if you see in the mirror, I'm playing with the Irish language. It's not in English. It's a different language. So for me, know more about the country is make conscience about what is actually um, everything that Ireland can bring to Latin America. And also in this book talk about not about like the social problems in Latin America, not exactly, but I trying to get the culture from different countries as Nicaragua or Guatemala or any other country, and bring that to the new generation as a magical word, so they can get involved in both cultures, the Irish cultures and the Latin culture. So that for me is this is a big challenge, because it's, first of all, it's not my language, but I decided to start to do something in English. So I'm working at the moment with an Irish English teacher, and Dublin. He's helping me with all the grammar and everything. So we are building this new chapter in my life together. And also he's very proud about how much I can learn about this country and how can I play with that to make something different, something new. And this is the first book and a storytelling in 6 books. So my big challenge here is try to get or try to know how can I be able to bring my work to a different publisher. So that's what I'm doing here. This is my intention with this book. Try to teach the new generation about how beautiful and big is the country.
Thank you so much, Christian, for that. I'll just stop sharing at the moment. That's wow, that's fantastic. Certainly, I mean, fiction as a means of knowing another culture. I mean, it's just so fascinating, and particularly, you mentioned, you know, this new generation that that would have resources like this, you know, to experience a culture different from their own, and also the chat you mentioned, the challenges of writing perhaps in a second language or an acquired language, which is certainly you know, another factor there with that experience for you. So thanks for sharing that, Christian. So I have Kate Quinn is next here on my list. So Kate, I'll just introduce you here briefly. So Kate Quinn is a lecturer in the Department of Spanish and Latin American Studies at NUI Galway. Her main research interests are in contemporary Latin American literature and culture, with a particular focus on Chilean crime narrative. She also works on comparative crime fiction studies, an area in which she has organized several conferences. So Kate, it's lovely to meet you. I'm going to just get Kate's images up here now, and then I'll just share my screen. Great. Great, so I'll get started there.
Okay, well, it's from Alice Quinn now to Kate Quinn. So nice location of surnames there. So I want to, I suppose, talk about Chilean crime fiction, Irish crime fiction. And, you know, there are a number of people in the audience at the moment, Diana Battaglia, Mirna Vonson herself, David Conlon, who work in this area as well. So, you know, who've hosted crime fiction conferences or symposia. And the thing about crime fiction is you're always coming into a genre that is transnational. So even when you start from the perspective of Chile, so when I started working on Chilean crime fiction, the first thing you're looking at is the history of the genre in Chile and kind of how it maps onto the transnational currents of genre development. But it's interesting, the focus for today's discussion, because when I was first working on Chilean crime fiction back in the 1990s, so after 1993, 1994 in Chile, I went over as a postgraduate student and I started reading crime fiction, and I was struck by how political it was, how deeply it reflected the moment of transition to democracy, that entire decade in Chile. And it has continued to be very political ever since. One of the things I predicted at the time to anyone who cared to listen was that Northern Ireland, where I was at the time studying in Queens, Northern Ireland at the time was going through the peace process. So I started reading Chilean crime fiction in 1994, at the moment when the peace process in Northern Ireland was starting. And I was predicting all along, give it a few years and this genre is going to boom in Northern Ireland as well, because it's going to cover the same kind of ground. So this first slide is an overview of the career of Ramon Diaz, who is, I suppose, the most prolific of the Chilean crime writers and one of the first. And I've highlighted 3 of the books in particular. And the first is Nadie sabe más que los muertos. Thank you. So this was published in '93. It was one of the first novels that I actually read. And it's all about investigation into the disappeared. So private investigator Heredia is hired to find the whereabouts of a child who was born to political detainees who were subsequently murdered. And the whole thing is about human rights violations. So the DINA, the secret police, disappearance, the law of amnesty, the limitations that imposes on any pursuit of justice, criticism of this transición pactada, and also the whole idea of memory, historical memory. So it's a wonderful example that I've used in my teaching. So if we could just move to the next slide. Thanks, Claire. So this is much more recently. The 1993 novel was very deeply engaged with the RETIC report. So that was the first report on human rights violations under Elwin's government in Chile. And this later book, 2008, deals with the investigation into torture. So this takes us to 2004, and it's all about the Valak report, translated as Dark Echoes of the Past, one of the first to be translated. So this is, again, it's all to do with human rights violations, it's all to do with historical memory. And eventually, if we could jump to the next slide, eventually, Northern Ireland did catch up. And one of the things that I was interested in, this is something that I'm working on at the moment, these are texts that I've compared in an MA course, comparative literature course that we teach here. So I've taught them both through English, so Dark Echoes of the Past and The Nameless Dead, to look at these 2 different countries and how they look at historical memory in a context where you have a divided community, a legacy of violence, a legacy of state violence, human rights violations, shady organizations. And so this book, The Nameless Dead, is published in 2012. So it's set along the border, and the cop is a Garda, Ben Devlin. So he's called to an island along with the PSNI they're looking for one of the bodies of the disappeared. Of course, the disappeared in Northern Ireland is a very different kind of disappeared to the disappeared in Chile. These are the disappeared who were murdered and buried in secret graves by the IRA. But what's interesting about this issue of human rights and the kind of deals that have to be done for transitions is that in Northern Ireland, if you find one of these bodies, you're not allowed to use, and you're not allowed to gather any evidence to use in prosecutions. And so this is my kind of point of comparison. So what I'm looking at the moment in this particular research paper is this issue of human rights. So crime fiction dealing with human rights in post-conflict societies. Anyway, that's where I stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that again. what a wonderfully unique perspective. I think we have just such a great mix here. Certainly, yeah, looking at crime fiction, the transition period in Chile, that's just fascinating to have that compared with Northern Ireland. And thank you so much for that, Kate. I'm going to move on then to our next speaker. Do we have Maria Torres with us? Yeah.
Yes, I am here.
Oh, hi, Maria. It's lovely to meet you after email exchanges. I'll just introduce you if that's okay, Maria.
Okay.
So Maria Torres is an Indigenous lawyer and master's student in UCC who serves as a parliamentary advisor at the Commission for Andean, Amazonian and Afro-Peruvian Peoples, Environment and Ecology at the Congress of the Republic of Peru. She is a political activist for Indigenous people's rights and has advocated for reclaiming Indigenous identity in Peru. So thank you for joining us, Maria. I'll let you get started there.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for the invitation. I am a lawyer. I have specialized on Indigenous people's rights. So approximately 6 years, I have dedicated my career to litigation on behalf of Indigenous communities that were struggling against extractive industries. I mean, the main problem here in Latin America and probably around the world is that Indigenous peoples are being losing their territories. There is pollution in their territories. Their leaders are being criminalized. They suffer for stigmatization. I mean, here in Peru, for example, Indigenous leaders who oppose to these mega mining projects, for example, they are usually called anti-development people, radicals. Sometimes they are even called terrorists. So there is a lot of stigmatization from the dominant culture, the dominant society towards Indigenous peoples. And the last couple of years, I have turned into politics. I serve as a parliamentary advisor at the Congress of the Republic. I am also a political activist, and I am advocating for reclaiming Indigenous identity in Peru. In this journey, I realized that I was Indigenous, and I was conscious of that when I was 26 years old. Even though my grandmother is a native Quechua speaker, but Indigenous peoples have suffered these integrationist and assimilationist policies in Latin America, and so they have to hide their culture in order to avoid discrimination. And in doing so, they have also assimilated to the dominant Western discourse towards Indigenous. So what I realized is that many Indigenous descendants that live in Lima, for example, that is the capital city of the country, nowadays deny this identity. Even though maybe their grandparents are Indigenous or speak an Indigenous language or were born in Indigenous communities. So a couple years ago, I was also invited to the Roger Casement Summer School in Dublin, and I had to read about Roger Casement, that is this Irish character that was an ambassador of the British Crown at the beginning of the 20th century. So I read a book of Mario Vargas Llosa, The Dream of the Celt. And when I was reading that book, I realized that Roger Casement, who had to prepare for the British Crown 2 reports, one in the Congo and the other one in the Amazonia, about the situation of Indigenous peoples, the struggling they were having by extractive industries, I realized that he had this process of reclaiming his Irish identity. And after doing that, he joined the Irish Revolution that later achieved the right to self-determination. So after this, I realized how important can actually self-identification can be in the reclaiming of the right to self-determination. So I am now investigating for my master's research this topic, and I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's fantastic to have you here. Really striking all that you've said there about self-identification and self-determination, and I suppose the impact that has on us in our work, whether we're creative culture practitioners, academics, or involved in policy and in activism, and like yourself. It's really fascinating. Thank you so much. So I will introduce Myrna Vonson. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Myrna, given that I had the pleasure to be in Myrna's class not so long ago in Maynooth University, and I have many fond memories of a very cheerful classroom. And so thank you for that, Myrna. And it wasn't until later on that I realized, how many Latin American cultural enthusiasts were among the lectures that I had in that undergraduate degree. But Myrna, I'll just introduce you if you don't mind there. So Myrna is an assistant lecturer in Spanish at Technological University Dublin. She holds a PhD in Hispanic Studies from University College Dublin. Her research focuses on Latin American culture with a focus on the visibility of minorities in cinema. She is currently co-writing a historical documentary on Eva Perón and co-editing a collected volume on contemporary Argentine women filmmakers. Myrna, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction and for inviting me to this presentation and remembering our classes back in Maynooth. Yes. Okay, I'm going to stop there with the classes back in Maynooth. Okay, so in the course of my brief intervention, I will touch upon two ways through which my engagement with Latin American culture aids an understanding of this vast region in Ireland. And the two ways are demystification and visibility. Now, demystification and visibility are very much connected to what I do for a living, and that is teaching and doing research. Now, let me start with demystification. So, as lecturers, our primary audience are obviously our students. And ever since I started lecturing, I made a point of demystifying the idea that Latin America is this exclusive site of violence, and making my students aware of the richness of Latin America. So in order to debunk and challenge this idea that Latin America equals narcos, what I do in my class is I shift the focus. Yes, well, I'm surprised that when you ask, that's the first thing that comes up in many of the cultural classes. So in order to demystify this idea and to debunk this, what I do is I try to shift the focus from violence and include other issues that are also part of the Latin American reality. And these are issues such as resilience, resistance, and solidarity, among others. Now, in doing so, what I'm trying to do is to give my students a rich or a better and a more rounded understanding of Latin American culture. And this, in turn, is aided by other dimensions that I incorporate into my teaching, and these are the ethnic diversity of Latin America and the similarities that both Latin America and Ireland share. Although separated by thousands of kilometers and in two different regions of the world, we can see that the two face similar challenges. Now, if demystification has to do with my teaching, then visibility is much more connected to my research. And the primary focus of my research is the representation of Jewishness in Latin American cinema. But lately, I have expanded my research areas, and as Claire has mentioned, I have just submitted the manuscript to a historical dictionary on Eva Perón. And I am working on 2 other projects at the moment. One is transgender identity in Latin American cinema. And the other one is I am co-authoring a volume with Daniel Mourenza from Trinity College Dublin, who is here today listening to us. And that is on Argentine female directors in contemporary Argentine cinema. So I'm a firm believer that the research that we carry out in academia should not remain only in academia, but should cross borders and reach out to a non-academic audience. So I grab every single opportunity to do this, and therefore I have participated in different fora. And I think what we are doing here today is precisely what I think we should all be doing, reaching out and building bridges between academia and non-academic circles. And I have also taken advantage of platforms such as the RTE Brainstorm. And I will just finish giving you an example of that is very much connected to the last talk we had here, the last conversation back in February, that made me think a lot about connections between Ireland and Latin America. And I was invited to take part in an initiative by the Argentine government in commemoration of International Women's Day. And the initiative was called Nosotras Movemos el Mundo y lo Transformamos. And when I had to give a little interview, and during the course of that interview, I could then draw parallels between the situation of the Argentine woman and the Irish woman nowadays. But I also grabbed that opportunity to bring out my research and highlight what I am doing in my classroom and through my research to highlight the Latin American woman in an Irish context. So for me, visibility of what we do in academia, in our classrooms, is key to aid an understanding of what Latin America is, not only in Ireland, but also beyond. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mudna, for your intervention there. Really fascinating again. In terms of how you apply that, I suppose, practically in the classroom is something that's so important. How that can actually be done. And I mean, we're all big Netflix fans over the last year in particular. And, with the narco dramas, sometimes there can be a lack of, of that kind of complexity and, of issues that you mentioned, like solidarity and resilience, that they just don't maybe get that screen time where perhaps, there's a lack, I suppose, of other kind of narratives there. And that's maybe, I suppose, Margaret, you were saying about, again, that lack of kind of a diversity of representations there, and even in terms of, the Irish or Irish names in the Irish diaspora there. And it's just a lack of that complication, isn't it? That kind of just robs us all of the opportunity to really, get into it and kind of do something. But I won't keep going. I'll move on to our final speaker before the break. So we have Aisling Walsh with us today. Aisling is currently working towards a PhD in sociology at the National University of Ireland, Galway, where she is researching decolonial and feminist practices of healing justice in Guatemala, supported by the Andrew Green Postgraduate Scholarship in Conflict Resolution with the Irish Research Council. She is also a freelance writer and translator based between Ireland and Guatemala. So Aisling, I'll put your Twitter here in the comments and you can just start whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Thank you for that introduction, and it's really great to see some familiar faces. Kate was my undergrad Spanish teacher, and I remember doing Nadie sabe que los muertos with her, and thinking about, I was preparing a class on transitional justice yesterday, and yeah, so those learnings from Chile are still there. So as you mentioned, my PhD, I'm halfway through almost. It's my second year, so a year of the PhD was lost to COVID. Not quite completely lost, but there's significant delays. I just got back to Guatemala beginning of or at the end of January. And so I've been living here for, this will be my 7th year in Guatemala. And I came here as a wee intern with Trocra, and ended up working on lots of issues around transitional justice and land rights, Indigenous rights. And then in 2016, I did a course with a local feminist organization called Cuerpos, Erotismos y Sexualidades, or Bodies, Eroticism and Sexuality. And it changed my life. And when I finished the diploma with them, it was a 16-month diploma. I did another 6-month therapeutic process with them. And after that, that still wasn't enough. So I proposed to the director of the organization, would she be interested in collaborating on a research project and for my PhD? And she said yes. So we've been, it's been like nearly 3 years in the making. Even though I'm only halfway through the PhD, we've been talking about this research for like at least 3 years. So basically it's based on their propuesta, their work, and there's the centrality of healing as a political process, and how healing is tied to personal and collective transformation. So the institute, or the organization's director, Yolanda, she is an anthropologist and a survivor of the internal armed conflict. Her parents were disappeared. She herself was a guerrillera. And having kind of gone through the whole spectrum of leftist activism in Guatemala, she set up the Centro Canil to focus more on personal transformation, arguing that one of the reasons why social movements have failed is because the social transformation that they're looking for or working towards is rarely ever accompanied by personal healing or transformation. So the PhD is really focusing on Guatemala's legacy of violence and the war within a continuum of colonial violence and violence that continues to the present day. And then sort of spaces where based on affectivity and community, feminist thought and decolonial practice, feminist practice as well, come together, and where the healing is centered around like personal reflection, political reflection, and incorporating the body as much as possible, where those processes are privileged over intellectual, academic, not intellectual, but very academic focused reflections. So it's reflexive and politically engaged ethnography, transdisciplinary, and yeah, I'm halfway through, and that's about all I can say on the PhD. I could say loads more on loads of other things, but I have some things saved for the next question. So,
thank you, Aisling. Oh, sorry, there's some. Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for that. That was absolutely fascinating. I hope I get to ask you some questions at the end as well, because that's a really fascinating project that you're working on. So now that our speakers have had a moment to kind of briefly introduce themselves, we're just going to do a quick 5-minute break just to give us all a bit of a breather, give us a minute. We'll come back at 5, and then we'll have chats and we'll have discussion then. Great. So I'll see everybody in 5 minutes then, if that's okay. Feel free to mute or turn off cameras or whatever suits. Hello again. Oh, hold on, am I connected here now? Oh, I just connected my earphones. I just had earphones running out of charge. Just one moment there. Is that coming through okay, that sound?
Yeah, we can hear you okay, Claire,
Excellent.
thanks.
Great. So lovely. Okay, so so thanks again to all our speakers. I'm really excited to get kind of the discussion going now for us. So I might just comment, I suppose, a bit on some of the points that kind of stuck with me most from what was said, and I really hope not to misrepresent anything that was said. Please correct me if I've interpreted your intervention incorrectly. But I suppose, of course, you're all coming from such unique standpoints, and that's really, I suppose, what we were hoping, and that's you know, the idea. But if I could maybe attempt to kind of bring some of your points together, I know Myrna spoke about visibility, and I think that is something that comes through for me, but even more so perhaps questions of absence and presence. So who is there and who is represented, and who are we kind of seeing? And I know, Johnny, you started it off there, and you mentioned, you know, in the Irish context, food delivery workers who are so often underrepresented in discourses of workers' rights and of justice. I know it's a huge problem in Ireland at the moment. And I suppose actually what I might do is I might just ask, first of all, I'll just give you the question that I'm going to kind of hope for you all to kind of comment on. But it's just very simply, you know, just how these themes of absence and presence, or if you prefer seeing and who we see, maybe how those themes come up in your work, whether they've come up for you. If they haven't, great, no problem, tell me something else. But if you could maybe think a little bit about that, about the seeing and who is seen and how we are seen. But if I could I'll just briefly remind us of what has been said so far. So we had Margaret then next, and I was particularly struck, Margaret, by what you mentioned about the Irish names being associated with people of African descent, and how I suppose this narrative of diaspora is not one that I suppose the more complex the narrative, right? It's not as visible, and again, this troubling and this unsettling of national historiographies and these kind of master narratives that, as I mentioned before, you know, attempt to kind of simplify and to maybe box things down a bit. Christian, you spoke about your experience as a fantasy writer, and how we can use, I suppose, fiction to kind of bridge those gaps, and I really enjoyed that. I'm an avid reader myself of fiction and of novels, and I think that it really can do so much for you in terms of that personal touch, and, you know, personifying perhaps stories that we might hear about in the news, and to I suppose bridge the gap in that way through fiction. And then Kate was speaking, in contrast, was speaking about crime fiction, and crime fiction in Chile and in Northern Ireland. And I suppose, you know, Kate, your quote really stuck with me there, of olvidar es hacerse cómplice, so to forget is to be an accomplice, or to be, you know, in some way accountable for, you know, atrocities that have occurred. And I think that's very true, and I think it's a very striking observation. And I think when we're thinking about absence, in terms of people who've been disappeared, it's really on a whole different level, and certainly more tragic and a more brutal context in that way. Maria, again, thank you so much. I didn't know, this is not an area that I was familiar with previously, but I was really struck by how you spoke about the stigmatization of Indigenous identities that, you know, as you've said, has led to hidden, them becoming hidden in some way, and almost invisibilized, if I could use that verb, by the stigma that's there, and leading to people even denying that this identity is relevant to them. Myrna then, as I've said, Myrna mentioned visibility in terms of Jewishness in Latin American cinema, and also the I suppose the assumptions, or maybe the preconceived ideas that exist in Irish society, but also in the classroom, with regard to Latin American people and lives and cultures, and kind of I suppose we're lacking that. We can be lacking that complexity sometimes, and that's where that's where more nuanced debates can come in there and can be helpful. And then I'll just finish up then, just very briefly. Aisling, what a fascinating project. Aisling was speaking about personal transformation and healing, and its role, I suppose, in social change. And you're kind of reminding me there of Audre Lorde talking about erotics and eroticism, and even someone like Mimi Scheller in the Caribbean speaking about the kind of the eroticism as kind of a personal or an individual change that then reawakens this political consciousness. So I just really found that fascinating there. So I just would love if you guys would like to comment on some of maybe the points that I've brought out from your work. I'll just leave it open to which of our speakers would like to start us off, and I'll just let each speaker just briefly respond to that.
Well, I can start. I don't know, you wanted to start. Sorry.
I was just gonna ask if we're following the same order as we did.
Not necessarily, Johnny, but if you'd like to get us started, please feel free.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I thought was really interesting the points that Maria brought about the erasing of indigenous identity and self-identification. And because I see a lot of people coming from Latin America countries that see themselves as something else, and then when they get in Ireland, they start thinking about themselves as people of color, self-identifying as as Black people, as because the race the race marks kind of change. So in Brazil, I'm seen as white, right? But I'm not a white person here, living in Dublin. So that leads to you start thinking about yourself and self-identifying in a different manner. And it's very interesting as well what Aisling, if after that, I don't know if she can like share some of the literature that she's working with, because it's really interesting. And I think that's the whole point of the colonialism thinking that I was talking about. That is the term that people are using, and most of them indigenous people in Brazil, indigenous, bringing this point of not just decolonizing, but being anti-colonization and rethinking all the structures that we kind of received through the Christianization of our land, or our country, and all the baggage that was brought as well, of the monotheistic religions, and the language. We speak just one language in the whole country, and like that was like and what was the meaning of everything in social fabric, in life. and that is what people are really talking about in, and I thought that was really interesting what Ashley was saying, and that concept of what is the what Myrna was talking as well of visibility, right? Because if you don't see yourself, and if you can't really you don't have a point of reference, it's hard to see yourself or to find yourself. You kind of have to make this inner journey and maybe go to therapy, and but sometimes that's not a hard, that's not easy to do when you're a foreigner living abroad, and you're not working in it's not very easy, right? So yeah, that was very interesting. I thought the whole conversation, it's super interesting, guys.
Thanks so much, Johnny. I might just go through the list if that's okay, and just take any comments or any reactions anyone has to the speakers. Margaret? You're muted there, Margaret.
Thanks, everybody. It's just been a fascinating hour of, listening to some really interesting and exciting work being done. And it is, like, I love the way you pulled out that absence or presence, because it's something that resonates with everybody's topic in some ways. And I think, I suppose mine being so, it's historical, it's in colonial archives. You see how these structures can, make people invisible. Including, say, for instance, civil records. They were separated by color, by race, in the up to independence, I think, in Cuba. And so unless you think which I did, I spent a while in parish records in Cienfuegos without ever going near black records. I focused on white records, not thinking, totally not thinking. It seemed like the obvious thing to do, and I didn't question it until I discovered that, hey, there's a whole other history here, that has to do with Irish people as well. And, started to find all kinds of other, really telling documents, which were told a whole other part of the history. So I think, it's that thing of just unconsciously, really, approaching something based on, ideas of race, almost subliminal, until it's brought to your attention. And then you can pay closer attention to what needs to be attended to. And I think, that sort of, we can bring that into today, where institutions are, built on ideas of race, and a total sort of lack of attention, lack of consciousness around diversity, around race, etc., around gender. And we've seen the difference paying attention to women's history has made, particularly if we look at Irish history. It's made such an enormous difference to our understanding of our history, not just women's history, but our history in general. Same goes for, racial processes, racialization. In terms of our history, we tend to look at a certain aspect of Irish history abroad in the diaspora, and totally ignore our relationships with other people, Indigenous people, people of African origin, and other Europeans, Asians in the diaspora. And we travelled and moved with all those people from all over different continents. And we must really, I think, to understand the entanglement of all these histories, we need to pay attention to all of this and make it visible.
Absolutely, Margaret. Thank you for that. Christian, would you like to comment?
Well, honestly, thank you very much for inviting me to this an amazing meeting. I have different points of view from different people, and that opened my eyes to get more conscious about the different things. Actually, the Maria was talking about that how how difficult it is for some people get involved in a new culture. I just realized like that I can use that to bring to get to the new generation a little more conscious about it, and also, and that's what I want to do. Actually, that's why I want to take some parts of Ireland and some parts from Latin America to make an that same history. Um, because at the end of the day, we know everything about all the problems, but there's a lot of uh, teenagers or young people, they don't know, they don't get involved, because when we are living in a different era, like more, it's very difficult to try to show to the new generation what is happening, what is the reality of war, because nothing is just like Instagram or Facebook, because that's fake, you know. So for me, I want to use all these kind of issues and turn it in something more soft, but with a message. It's not just about, oh, do you have to believe in this? It's like, this is my message, but for the new generation. So I'm so glad to be part of this. I'm sorry if I couldn't explain more about my book, but I was a little nervous.
No problem, Christian. Thanks so much for your comments. And just to say as well, just that we will be taking questions from the audience. So if
Yeah,
anything
great.
occurs to you, just feel free to pop it in the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. But Kate, I might let you comment there if you'd like.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to thank the organisers and the other speakers. The question is what not to say, because there's so much to say. First of all, Aisling, I'm delighted that Nadie sabe más que los muertos, if it played any small part in your trajectory, I'm thrilled at that, because your work is fascinating. So that's one thing. And just, connections. While I was listening to people, you're talking about colonial history. I mean, it's something that we talk about, and we do try to make connections when we're teaching Latin American colonial history to Irish students. So, for instance, the language issue. So, Maria, you talked about your grandmother speaking Quechua, and that has a resonance for me, because my great-grandparents were native Irish speakers, but then it didn't get transmitted to the next generation. And that was for cultural, political, economic reasons. And it is, it is a huge loss. Absences, things that are noticed. In Chilean crime fiction and Irish crime fiction, I could go through a litany of areas that are touched upon. Environmentalism, feminism, migration, racism, trafficking of people. But there are things that just don't seem to get touched upon. And in the case of Chile, one of the big absences, or something that has been skirted around but not directly addressed, is the Mapuche conflict in the south of Chile. And this brings us back to the idea of ethnicity and what gets represented, because that's one of the most fascinating things that's happening at the moment in Chilean politics. And the writers in Chile, none of them that I'm aware of so far, have really got to grips with that. And I would love to see a crime fiction emerge that looks at that. And the last thing I'm going to say is, Mirna, apologies for teaching literature that deals with violence in Latin America. But if it's any comfort, to you, it's a two-way street, because when I was a PhD student doing research in Chile, and people found out I was from Northern Ireland, it was all, are you Catholic or are you Protestant? And it was all, oh, Bobby Sands, bombs. So these ideas, it's a two-way street.
Thanks, Kate, so much for that. Maria?
Yeah, I think we have several challenges, the ones that consider ourselves activists. I think, for example, the first one is to, in my case, it was reclaiming this indigenous identity, and in this position, telling indigenous peoples that I am their ally, and I think this exercise should be replicated, by all indigenous descendants these days, but it is not going to be if they don't reclaim this identity. Another challenge that I find is that these topics are usually taught in the academia, and how can we bring these reflections to people that are not intellectuals, you know? And I think that in this regard, culture is essential. You know, I think it's wonderful that we have a musician and a writer here, because I think they are going to be the ones achieving that challenge that is important. And also, we have talked about anti-colonialism, and I think that race, identities in general are really important these days. I have seen that here in Peru, the academy is not talking much about it. That's what I have started to investigate in that topic. And I think this kind of conversations should keep going.
Thanks so much, Maria. Mirna?
Okay, so first in response to Kate, oh, I don't mean it that way. I also deal with bombs in an Argentine context, and I showed that to my students. But what I meant is that they shouldn't just stay with that, but also see the other side of it. Yeah, and what happens in the films. It's mainly films I work with, so it's in the films that there is another side to it. And so it's good, Kate, you're doing that. Excellent. Now, in terms of the seen and not seen, Claire, that you proposed at the beginning, the dichotomy between the two, when I think back to the Argentine context, I can see that many of the problems or the not seen are rooted in the Argentine national narrative. Yeah, this not seen the ethnic diversity of Argentina until we recovered democracy in the 1980s. Yeah, is part of that national narrative that has always indoctrinated the Argentines and saying, "Oh, you are different. You are white people, and you are not Latin Americans." Yeah, we were always told that we were an enclave of Europe in South America. Yeah, so that idea is very much rooted in Argentine culture, for example, and many of these erasures or many of these absences have to do with that. Yeah, with that idea that has been inculcated or has been put in our minds for a very long time. Things change after democracy. The indigenous populations were recognized as part of Argentina, and that has been very slow. And I can tell you many things that they have done with. I know that the Guarani Indians in northern Argentina, for example, finally in the 1980s, they won some of their land back. Yeah, but that was it. And there was recognition was on paper, yeah, and some of the land was given back to them, but then they were left there again at the fringes of society, and this is something that the story repeats itself time after time. Now, my idea with with studying Jewishness and Jewish representation is that Jews have also been, in a way, erased, and they have not been recognized as an ethnic minority in Argentina also until after we came back to democracy in the country, and so on with different groups. And until, for example, the 1990s approximately, Asian Argentines, yeah, were like nobody recorded their existence. I mean, or nobody studied. Now there are some studies that are coming up in academia that recognize the ethnic diversity of Argentina, but this monolithic idea is competing with the ethnic diversity of a country which is very much, yeah, a mix of different races. Yeah, so there are several sides to it. I mean, and I think in academia, many people are trying to visibilize it, to give visibility to all these ethnicities. And well, we are, and finally Argentina has understood that we are part of Latin America. Cara Levy wrote an excellent book that states that, and why is it so. So yeah, so what we are doing, I just wrote here, we are rescuing those stories that were hidden up to now, we as academics, but also the national narrative is changing in Argentina, fortunately. Yeah, but this is very much rooted in our history and what they wanted to achieve, all this assimilation is that I think, was it you, Johnny, that you mentioned, yeah, this assimilation that we all have to be equal, and but in fact you don't see the nuances in society. Yeah, all this is lost. As Maria was saying, yeah, suddenly you recognize yourself as being part of a group, yeah, that was hidden from the national narrative. Yeah, so I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Mirna. Ashton, I'll let you speak there.
Okay, I think like everyone, there's so much you could comment on. We could be here for another couple of hours, but Johnny, I'd really like to thank you for your questions and your observations. I get really excited when I talk about who I'm reading, and also because there's so much amazing scholarship happening from Latin America, and so my much of my reading is, well, I'm making a conscious decision with Sarah Ahmed is really in favor of citation activism. So I have the perfect justification there to really, I'm trying to base everything on feminismos desde la Abayala and decolonial thinking from Abayala. There's so many amazing Indigenous scholars in Guatemala and across the continent, like Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, por supuesto, Aracumes in Guatemala, and I have to say, like, this PhD really is based in relationships, and it's based in friendships, and I'm really centering those relationships in how I think about and how I write about this topic. The friendships that I have with Yolanda as like a part of the director of CNIL, but also the whole almost all the team. Like, we have very kind of very mixed, diverse relationships. And then one of my best friends, Marco Givalan, who Margaret has already heard me talking about him so much, but he's like, I think, probably the smartest person I know apart from my PhD supervisor. So and his work in queer Indigenous scholarship and activism is what has been one of the things that has inspired me most. And I realize how much our conversations and his openness with me is just like shaped my way of thinking. And he's the one who introduced me to Donna Haraway, to Ursula Le Guin, to Octavia Butler. He's just, and I think for me, like, I feel like a writer more than an academic. And I, wanted to do a PhD because the topic is, I'm really passionate about the topic, but I wanted a space to write as well. And like just recognizing where your influences come from and who's shaped your thinking. And I was watching talk. Donna Haraway gave a conference yesterday with the Monterrey Tech, which I'm sure will be available online. And I think she's just such an amazing example of like probably one of the most distinguished academics of her time. And she's so humble and so acknowledges where all her ideas come from, you know? And so this idea of entanglement and partial healing and multi-species, you know, finding ways to live in a damaged planet, imagining our futures in the present, like the Zapatistas would say. And this is the last point that I'll make. CNIL just started offering its main diploma online. I think they really struggled with adapting to the online format because the body work and like this physical presence is so much part of what they do. But it's clear that the pandemic is going to continue and that you know, face-to-face processes are not going to be able to happen probably this year. So, but that has opened other opportunities. And so there are people connecting from Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Mexico, and there's a Guatemalan woman in Spain, there's a woman connecting from England, and so there's a reach now that it never had before, and it's really the sort of whisperings of what they're doing are traveling across the continent, and the importance of the collective process. So many of the students mentioned that on Saturday, that therapy is fine, but like going on this journey together and making these discoveries together is such an important feature of that space as well. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Aisling, and to everyone. I might just briefly just read out a couple of the comments that we've been getting here in the chat. Mariano Paz spoke at our last event in February, and I love the phrase that you've put here, Mariano. Argentina es el más latinoamericana de los países europeos. So Argentina is the most Latin American of all the European countries. Just linking back to what Mirna was saying about, I suppose, maybe that kind of exceptionalism. I don't know if Mariano, you'd like to comment.
No, I completely agree with what Mirna was saying, and that sensation is what you know, there was this common phrase in the 1930s, in the 40s, Argentina is the most European among Latin American countries, and Borges inverted that in a pan that sort of, it exemplifies exactly Mirna's point. That has changed. You couldn't say that now, of course. It's not just a racial issue, it was an economic issue. Argentina was a very rich country in the 1900s, 1910, 1915, among the top 10 countries in the world by GDP. Not anymore. No, Mirna, but yeah, so just to say that. Completely agree with Mirna. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mariano. Is there anything, just we might wrap up in a couple of minutes time, but I just wanted to just give the opportunity if there's any further comments any of the speakers or any of the participants want to make, or any questions. I'll just give a moment now in case there's anybody that wants to get something off their chest before we kind of start to close up.
There's a couple more comments.
Yeah, Narella.
Hi. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions. First of all, I think it was really amazing the amount of people here participating and the amount of topics that have been touched. I think it was really interesting. But I wonder, maybe a question, I don't know if it's especially for Maria or Mirna or Johnny even, but when you were talking about Johnny, I think he was the one who said that Brazil was one of those countries who never looked outside in the region, right? You look just inside the country, or you look at Europe or North America, but never in the region. And I am Argentinian, so I understand that very well because we're two huge countries in the region. And So I wonder if that has, on your opinion, maybe something to do with the same things that Maria was saying about not being conscious and not embracing our own ethnics and our own culture, right? A little bit of what Mirna was saying about that and visibility. So maybe if you can elaborate on that, if you think it has something to do with that, with the thing is, we always look outside, we always look north, even though we are in south. Not only look outside, but we look north, and we try to make ourselves and to believe ourselves to be European or North Americans when we are Latins, of course, and we have so many roots nowadays in our countries. And people, I'm Argentinian, I live in Dublin, and many people have always said, like, I'm married to my husband is not as white as I am, of course, and everyone, when he says he's from Argentina, it's like, are you sure? Like, of course he's gonna be sure. How can someone be unsure from where he's from? And this, I think, has something to do what we've been talking about, right? Or what you were talking about. So could you think that there's a bridge between those things? We always look outside and we never appreciate our own culture. We never honor our own cultures that are ancestors as well. Not only European cultures are really well with many roots from far from the history. I think Latin America has a lot of that, and I don't think we can acknowledge that. So if you think that's maybe a bridge in that, and if you can elaborate on that, I would be really interested in to hear your opinions.
Yeah, I actually think that Brazil has like a very, it's a weird thing. I think it's the opposite of Argentina, because we have in a way embraced the multicultural origins of the race, and that, but that has its issues as well, because then we kind of erase everything, every problem that has to do with race. So the indigenous movement and the black movement had to face that narrative where there's racial equality in Brazil. There will always be racial equality in Brazil, which was a lie, but was a lie constructed by um, sociologists at the beginning of of the century, last century, when we're trying to figure it out. What's Brazil like? Or what is Brazil? What is to be Brazilian? And I think that that's a part of the big fight between Brazilians and Argentinians as well, because we always think that Argentinians think they're Europeans. That there's the whole rivalry as well. So yeah, there's that thing.
So it's not football. It's not the problem. Okay, that's good to know.
I think it's Brazil has like because of the language, and because this is one of the things that are hard, and because Brazil is so big, it's so diverse, it's hard to look outside because there's a lot of things happening. Like there's in the northeast and the north with the Amazon and all that part of the cultural background, and then the center of Brazil. But I'm sure this is one of the things we're kind of trying to the thinking of, oh, we are a racial democracy, but we aren't. We're not actually, because most of the prison population is black. Most of people of back favelas, and they are black. And how do we treat the indigenous people in Brazil? Who are the people who are CEOs of companies? And they're all white. So and all from São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So that's a big tension in Brazilian politics right now, because these are the problems that are being tackled right now. So and that's, I think, one of the why the Bolsonaro got elected, because this is being a subject in the last 20 years that's being brought up always. So yeah, I think there's particularities in South America that we should address as well.
Thanks so much for that, Johnny and Nerea. It's great to see you again. Nerea spoke at the February event, so it's really nice to see people coming back. And on that note, we really hope, I'm going to bring us to a close now and just say that we really hope to see as many of you as possible at the next and final talk in this series. So that's going to be on April 28th, same time frame, so 4 p.m. To 5:30 p.m. Again, all more than welcome. I will be circulating a list of speakers and their details a bit closer to the time, and certainly all of this month's speakers and last month's speakers will get that. So please share. It's just been amazing to kind of see how this session has really built on some of the ideas that came up last time, but also some very new perspectives here. And again, just so wonderful to have that mix of people involved in policy advising and social change, activists, writers, musicians, academics. It's just been wonderful to have you all here chatting. And I've no doubt now that it's coming up to coming up to 6 o'clock now. So listen, I'll close here for the moment. Just a huge thank you to all of our speakers. And also to my co-organisers, Kira and Carlos. Anyone that knows them knows they're a real pleasure to work with. So it's been brilliant to be involved in this. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks a million. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm just trying to stop the recording.
Hi, Mom.